What's going on, lads and lassies? It's Ocean here from the South Stand, coming back again with another video. And unfortunately, not in as good a mood this week as I was last week after that win against West Ham United. This is all coming obviously a little bit late. Forgive me, it was my birthday this weekend, so I didn't film the review so quickly. We played Burnley this weekend and came to a 2-0 defeat, which, to be honest, before the game I was feeling pretty confident. Once the game started, it just didn't feel right. The way we were attacking, the way we were getting to the final third with pretty much no answers. The whole thing was different to what we'd experienced the week before, but ultimately Burnley set up in a way that was much more favoured to be a tough game compared to West Ham. I'll explain that in a second. Let's just get right into things. So as I was saying in the intro there, the setup from Burnley was definitely a little bit different to what we faced against West Ham. Where with West Ham, we came in against a 4-3-3. With Burnley, it was a 4-2-3-1. And it was out of possession, it was a 4-4-2. And it was a pretty deep low block that Sunderland just struggled with the whole game. So let's get into how the game went and what happened. Starting off well, it was pretty combative. Both teams were going back and forth, a little bit open. It seemed to show pretty quickly that Sunderland were a bit stuck for answers in that final third. However, in the opening 10 minutes, Eliza Mayenda does get a chance to put the ball in the back of the net, and unfortunately completely missed the target. It was one of those ones where that goal goes in and it's a different game. And I know we've all heard that before, but truly, that early in a match against a team that was going to plan to sit in as soon as they got that first goal, it just it would have changed the whole thing. And we know Burnley well after last season in particular, and we've seen them get these 1-0 wins and hold on to that 1-0 lead the whole game. It's not something we should have came here even trying to mess around with. But anyway, so Eliza obviously misses that first chance, and from there we see the game progress a little bit. Within again the first 10 minutes, first 15 minutes at most, Dan Ballard comes off with what seems like a groin injury. Now, this one, I think, had a massive effect on the game. Not only does Dan Ballard offer something in the box defensively and offensively when it comes to these headers, we've all seen that in the first week. We've seen that in the semi-finals. We've seen that pretty much any time he's played. But we also missed, and I think this is a key point to how we couldn't get the ball in the back of the net, we missed Dan's ability to bring the ball forward up the pitch as well. And I don't think that's quite spoken enough about. So when we reflect on last season and how Sunderland managed to bring the ball out from the centre-backs, often it was Luke O'Nien, the one who was trusted to bring the ball forward. Since he's not been in the team this season, we've seen it from Dan. If you watch that game against West Ham, he's quite confident. And it was the same actually in the playoff final. I remember it happening numerous times, but he's quite confident to drive forward with the ball and bring Sunderland up the pitch with him. Instead, against Burnley, especially against that 4-2-3-1, in the way we set up with a single pivot and Granit Xhaka and then Siddiqui and Habib Diarra playing forward, it just left this huge gap. Granit was getting the ball so deep in Sunderland's half, and to be honest with you, he's not particularly a great central midfielder in terms of progressing with the ball at his feet. Great passer, great tackler, great spatial awareness and all that kind of thing. But Granit Xhaka just doesn't move up the field with it, but he's not the kind of player he's not the kind of midfielder who's going to be able to dribble past people. And with that, we were left with this huge gap because with their formation, they had a man already on Siddiqui, they had a man on Habib, and Granit would get forward and just have no outlets of where to put the ball. They pretty much had everyone covered because they were sitting in such a deep block. And on the other hand as well, this season I've really enjoyed the fact that we're playing in more of an inverted fullback role. If you watch Trey Hume and the way he moves throughout this game when Sunderland are going forward, he's just slyly creeping up that inner channel all the way up till eventually he can contribute to putting the ball forward. With that though, their formation, we just didn't get a chance to show that. With the formation, the way the game went, we still couldn't find a way to break down them in this instance in this game. And I think part of that was, to be honest, to do with the fact that when it came to Siddiqui and it came to Diarra, neither of them, in my opinion, were making a great effort to get away from their man and create that space. You've seen it sometimes, but it was almost like 2 seconds too late where the person on the ball, say it be Granit Xhaka, looking with the game ahead of him. He's looking ahead of him and he can see that Siddiqui and Diarra don't have the space to receive the ball. They're stuck to their man. They're not sitting in that little channel so we can create the gap. And then when they did move into that channel, it was already too far gone. I noticed as well how many times in this game how often Siddiqui passes back. Now, we've seen it last season. A lot of people would obviously complain that someone like Dan Neil would do the same. But Dan Neil progressed Sunderland through the pitch as well. And although last night against Huddersfield, he didn't actually have the best showing himself either, we miss those qualities of being able to have midfielders who are happy to carry the ball through rather than just passing. Because when the pass wasn't there, yes, in a game like against Burnley, when they sat in that deep block, they didn't really come out to press. They were happy to let Sunderland bring the game to them for quite a lot of it. Siddiqui, Diarra and Granit Xhaka are all players who would rather run with the ball, run onto the ball than have the ball at their feet. Siddiqui's kind of closer to Granit in that sense, where great passer, covers every blade of grass, can run up and down the field, but he's not really that type of midfielder who's going to take the ball, get past his man, and have that little bit of creativity. I think we should have brought on Enzo Lefebvre a lot earlier than we did in this game. It was clear that Burnley weren't going to come out and come towards us and press in that sense once they'd got their goal. Pre-goal, they were quite quick on the press and they were constantly in our faces. But once they got that goal, they weren't. I wonder if having someone like Enzo probably playing instead of Siddiqui, but it would be hard to tell really which way they go round. But having someone like Enzo who can link up with those inverted fullbacks, who can link with the wingers, who can play balls through into whichever striker we choose out of Mayenda or Isidore, because they're similar in the sense as well. They'd rather run onto the ball and then get there. I think that having Enzo in the game a little earlier would have helped in that sense, especially knowing that Trey is constantly sneaking up in that inner channel, the link-up play that he can have, because he's happy to drive with the ball forward. We've seen it throughout that Burnley game that a lot of the progression from the defenders came from Ronaldo and came from Trey. They were the ones more likely to progress the ball up the field. Maybe that's the way that Regis Labrie is setting up this season, but I think it showed in the Burnley game how against a low block, that is just not going to work, because our midfield trio, as great as they are, they're not ball carriers. They're not going to get past their man. They're not going to dribble past. They're more the type of player. Well, let me change that for a second. If you watch a lot of Habib Diarra's clips from his time in Germany, he can carry the ball at his feet. We've not seen that from him yet, though, in a Sunderland shirt, in my opinion, anyway. I think what also showed in this game as well, if Adingra and if Talby are proven to be not as like physically dominant as their opposing player, which they're never going to be. Like a winger's always going to be smaller than, well, a winger's 9 times out of 10 going to be smaller than the defender they're coming up against. But Burnley are such a physical team that when it came to our wingers, I don't think they had a lot of answers to get past that. We were leaving our wingers with too much to do in that game. They were pinned out too wide, and because of Burnley's physicality, and because there was a lack of kind of passing options on a lot of the time, we didn't have those 1-2s that we've seen in the past between the likes of, for example, Roberts and Ahmad back in the day. The way they two could sit in those channels and pass around players and then get the ball in. We didn't have that option there, and I don't particularly know yet if that's just a change in tactics. I'm not sure, because when you reflect as well on Dennis Irkin in comparison to someone like Ronaldo, he was so far up the pitch and everywhere, but Dennis is that overlapping runner who's going to get the ball out, he can swing it in. Ronaldo was everywhere, but I don't know if he's got the pace to play that way. We'll quickly touch on Burnley's 2 goals. Honestly, Josh Cullen's goal was just a piece of quality. Like, he had a fantastic game. I think he did have a far better game than Granit Xhaka. He was more influential. You can see him kind of directing Burnley throughout that game. When it comes to Burnley's 2 goals, honestly, I think they just showed the quality. They took their chances on the day and got past us, and that is something we're going to have to keep in mind when it obviously comes to Brentford. Tactically, things did change when Regis made the subs. Patrick Roberts and Enzo really were the only ones that tried to drive towards the players in that sense and dribble around them. And again, that is just more their style of play. But I think we needed that earlier on in the game, because clearly Burnley weren't going to bring the game to us. As I've said, they weren't going to press hard they weren't going to press hard, and they weren't going to press high, and they weren't going to pop out of position anytime soon. So just passing around the final third was comfortable for them, to be honest. Players like Enzo, players like Patrick Roberts can often unlock those because they can dribble, because of their quick, intricate passing. And I think that's really what the game needed. Sunderland needed speed. At the point where Sunderland were on the ball, things were so slow. And when you look at all of Sunderland's best bits from the last year, it's from fast, open play, that way they can break the ball quickly, where they can stretch out play, where all of our players who like to run onto the ball run onto the ball. That was never there against Burnley. They were quite happy to sit neat, sit compact, and that is something Sunderland are going to struggle with this year if Regis can't find the answers to it. As I've said, I think for me, when I look at that game, if we could play it all over again, I would have played Enzo from the start. I think sometimes you just need that little technical player that's going to be niggly, that's going to force their players to move out of position and create gaps as well. That never happened. They were structured and organised in a lot of the things that they've showed at the weekend. To be honest, a lot of the ways you could describe Brentford, which of course we're going to get on to. So Sunderland's next game is against Brentford this coming weekend. Now, having just watched Brentford's I just watched it earlier, Brentford's game against Aston Villa. They had, 25% possession at most. They were happy to let Aston Villa have that ball. And quite like Burnley, although Burnley just genuinely played better than us on the day, and they took their chances well, Aston Villa could not get past Brentford in that sense. Brentford were happy to sit back, let Villa have the ball, and they were quite confident to know that they could defend that as well. For me, though, I think Brentford will want to bring the game a little bit more to us. They're playing away at the Stadium of Light, but they should be looking at us as pretty much an established Premier League team by this point. You would imagine that they'd be looking at us saying, right, okay, we need to take our football to them. My only worry with a lot of this is Brentford play the same formation as Burnley. And I think just reflecting on how we went last week, if we think that Brentford are going to bring the game to us, then cool. Stick with the same formation, stick with the same way we played against West Ham, where they're happy to sit deep and then break, counter-attack the way that Sunderland have for the last year. But if there's any part of Regis Labrie that thinks that Brentford are going to be happy to sit off this ball, then we're going to have to change something, because that did not work against Burnley. It didn't work the way we were set up. Having Granit Xhaka in the single pivot with Habib Diarra and Noah Siddiqui sitting in front of him was the right call for that midfield in that game. And I think if we're going to play Brentford and thinking they are going to sit back deep and they are going to sit compact because they are away from home at the Stadium of Light, then I think it's got to be Enzo Lefebvre that comes in. When you look at Brentford's team, they're not a massive team either. So when you think about maybe Enzo's physicality and not being able to hold up in the Premier League, it's not really a particular fear that I have. But if you're thinking that way and you want players that are more physical, then maybe this is the type of game where Enzo can come in and shine. Because I think that him, again, playing as that little technical role, probably sitting a little bit further than Habib Diarra. This is the way I would set up. I would have Granit sitting deeper, then Diarra in front of him, more in that Joe Bellingham role from last year, and then Enzo Lefebvre playing forwards from there. We need something to break down this tight, organised team, because that's pretty much what Brentford are. They're organised, they're so well drilled, they're playing under a set piece coach who's obviously got them very, very well drilled in their set pieces as well. So it's not something we can rely on scoring from, especially with Dan Ballard being out. So it's going to have to be a game where Sunderland fix how to score in open play against these types of teams. So yes, that's what I would say. I would be bringing on Enzo Lefebvre. Reflecting on just last night's game against Huddersfield quickly, I didn't mind Wilson sitting out in the left in that game. If Adingra is struggling, whilst we have no Mundo and we have no real left wing option replacement, I wouldn't mind Wilson Isidore sitting in that left wing role. I just don't think we can keep sacrificing Enzo Lefebvre to play on the left wing. He needs to be central. It's where he plays best. And I just can't. I can't do Enzo coming on and playing the left hand side. And there is games where Adingra isn't quite settling in. I think against Burnley, him and Talby had moments where it seems like they were putting in a cross for the sake of it without lifting their head up to see who was there or where they even were in the box. I don't want to see that against Brentford more, because we need to be clinical. It showed against Burnley that not taking that chance in the first half with Eliza Mayenda did change the game, and it does change things. And Brentford are a team themselves who are clinical. When they get that 2, 3, 4 chances to get up the field in the game, they tend to take them, and it's something Sunderland are going to have to work on coming into this weekend. But look, there's a hell of a long season left to go. That game against Burnley was going to happen. I think the bright side of things is I don't think there's many teams that are going to play like that against Sunderland. There aren't many teams in the Premier League who are going to just sit back, especially if we are playing away from home. I think that's something Sunderland could look at this season, because you've seen it in the past. Sunderland have just struggled to break down this low block. We've seen it under Tony Mowbray. We've seen it last season. We're seeing it a little bit now. It's something we do have to work through, but luckily I don't think a lot of teams in the Premier League are going to give us that trouble, the same way that Burnley did. But if any of the team around us have paid any attention to that game, they'll notice that and they'll probably deploy it anyway. But as I said, coming into this game against Brentford, you would think that they're going to want to play more open, expansive football, and that's what Sunderland play best. We're best at counter-attacking. We're best when we can stretch the play. And as I said, there's a long season ahead. I don't think Burnley is a reflection of where Sunderland are going to be the whole season. Hopefully not anyway. Look, we could be sitting here doing the same review every single week for the next 36 games or however many we've got, but I just don't think it's going to be. I think a team like Brentford will want to try and play football properly against Sunderland, especially now that they're getting into the season a little bit more and Keith Andrews is becoming more comfortable with his team. If they do it, brilliant. It only plays into our hands. So looking forward to the weekend. If I was going to make any changes for the upcoming game, I think for me it would have to be that Enzo Lefebvre comes in, especially while Dan Ballard's out, because that gap between the defenders and Granit Xhaka sitting just in front of him, and then Siddiqui and Habib Diarra sitting so far forward, it just wasn't working for me, and I think we need to change that up. So I would bring in Enzo for this game. If Brentford set up in the same way they did last weekend, then for me that's who I would be bringing on. If it doesn't work, we can switch it out. Siddiqui can come back in and play that role. But I think let's try and spice it up a little bit. For me, it would be Enzo Lefebvre coming in that role there. So that's all I've got to say. Look, we've got a tough weekend again this coming week. There's not going to be an easy game in the Premier League, but if we can do anything, bring a good atmosphere to the Stadium of Light. You've seen how that first week was. You've seen how it went, the difference it made to the atmosphere and the difference it made to the players off the back of that. We literally seemed to suck goals into the back of the net when we're playing in front of the Roker End or the South Stand, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that's all for today, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. We'll be here all year doing the Sunderland reviews, previews, just talking about the lads basically. So yeah, how about the lads? Come on.